everybody, this is JDGaming back today with something very different for the channel. First off, I want to say it's been a while since I've been here. I recognize that, and so I'm going to let you know straight up, if you just want to see the alphabetical deck list for this thing, check out the description box down below. As always, I have the table of contents, and you can find the A to Z section or any other section of the video. And the reason I'm bringing that up right now is because yes, this is going to be a let's build as always, but you may be a bit confused. Why is this? Well, I'll give you a nice, lengthy intro that I feel is warranted by my long absence. So I spent a few weeks actually out of the country, went to Korea, visited my relatives, unplugged from my work, because let's be honest, becoming a pharmacy manager has been a lot of fun, but now I feel like I have no life outside of work, sometimes against my own will. Not a problem since I enjoy what I'm doing, but I wanted to get back into this game, wanted to share my thoughts and the fun that I've been having with this game with you guys. What little fun I've really had. And so we're here with 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗍, and a lot of you guys are probably like, JD, what is this? 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍? I know 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. Your mom knows 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. My grandma knows 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. I hate 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. Why are you doing 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍? A few reasons, actually. The first biggest reason is they're fun. They are such a cool archetype. Longtime viewers of my channel may know that I really value, in any card game really, any game, when a player gets rewarded for their knowledge of their own options and how they interact with other people's options and just how the game functions. This is a strategy. 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍s are a theme that really reward the player for knowing the ins and outs of their cards and how they interact with other people's cards. And that's just so cool, because while on the surface everyone looks at tournament reports and thinks, oh, 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍s have won for the umpteenth time, eradicate them on the next list. They're a very skill-intensive deck, and it honestly feels like every time I play this deck against a new opponent, I am learning something new. There are new interactions, there are new little nuances to things and how you sequence things, how you chain things, what order do you do things. It's just a really fun time, and it's not for everyone, I'll admit. It takes a lot of thinking, a lot of patience, and you won't necessarily always enjoy it if maybe you want to go more for complex combo sequences or just going all in with all your resources at once. But it is basically the modern format control strategy, if you will, and this has been my kind of foot in the door with the metagame these days. If you look at any deck that you see in any typical tournament, this is the type of deck I would be piloting, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to share it. The second reason I want to do this video first right now is Banlist is probably coming up, and although the numbers may change, I think my Let's Build style is going to be very effective at kind of showing you guys from the ground up how you build this deck. Because if you're like me, from just a few weeks ago, you didn't have any or very much experience with this deck. And everyone else, if you just watch the deck profiles, they're like, oh, this is standard, you play 3 Engage and 3 Widow Anchor, and like they'll tell you everything because they expect you to know it, especially when they're in a tournament setting. But that's not really helpful to the player who wants to learn. I want to provide at least one more alternative where you could watch this video and start from the ground up, so that you guys can also potentially enjoy 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍s as I am enjoying them as well. And another reason, a couple weeks ago before I went to Korea, I actually recorded this on my iPad. Gorgeous HD 24 minutes of crisp footage. I forgot that that thing can't record audio with my mic, and that's why I never recorded videos on that thing. It was painful, I admit, losing 24 minutes of footage, and that's why I ended up not even uploading another deck profile besides Psychics. I didn't have any time anymore because I ran out once I recorded 2 videos and one of them just went right out the door. Fortunately, the Psychic video is still up, but this video I wanted to do justice because, again, I love this theme, and even if this deck gets hit, look at all the past formats. People hated Necros. People hated Dragon Rulers. People hate this deck now, but mark my words, this is going to be a deck that people look back on fondly in the future, and it's definitely one that I will want to continue building going forward. Because remember, this deck just got all its reprints, which means it'll probably get hit in some capacity a bit further, but you also can access all the cards now. So I think no better time than the present, especially given all of these things lining up. And I also got this special little thing while I was in Korea. Some of you guys may have seen kind of on my community tab, but this gorgeous 𝗍𝗍, I just had to play this thing as well, because this is a rarity we don't even have at TCG, and kind of like this is not my special video, by the way. I'm doing a separate special video, but you know, this is just a piece of that. This is a piece of my memory on the trip this year. This is just such a fun strategy, and I want to share it with you guys. So I already said my spiel about go check the description box, leave comments if you're confused, but hopefully you checked some parts of the video. Other than that, we're gonna go ahead and build this thing from the ground up, so hopefully this will help you guys learn how to enjoy Sky Strikers as well. So without further ado, let's build Sky Strikers. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that helps you reach the theme's goals, and this is extra true for a deck like Sky Strikers that has seen this much success. We're starting off with the maximum number of copies of the aptly named Sky Striker Mobilize Engage, a card that really encapsulates what this theme is as a whole. Whereas in other strategies, we may start off with 3 copies of the boss monster that we're trying to build our theme around for kind of the end game, this is more of a control strategy that is very much spell-centric, and Engage sets the pattern for a lot of the other cards. First, to make them more balanced and not as splashable in other themes, they do require you to control no monsters in your main monster zone to activate. Then, they have a first primary effect just upon play, and then a secondary kind of unlock effect, if you will, if you play them while you have 3 or more spells in your graveyard. Engage, upon play, is a Rhoda, a reinforcement of the army that lets you add a Sky Striker card from your deck to your hand, except another copy of Engage. Then, if you have 3 or more, the unlock effect is you draw an additional card. There is no hard once per turn clause on this card, which is why it is such a huge topic card for potentially limiting it. Because if you play this card, and even if it were limited, get the search and the draw, you could summon out your Link monster Kagare that we'll talk about later, recycle this card, and play it again, effectively giving you 4 cards out of the 2 rounds of Engage, which is basically like playing 2 copies of Pot of Greed if you just look at the total number of cards. You start off with 1, pay it off, and then you get 2 in exchange, thus gaining 1 additional card above what you started with. That is why this card is so nuts, and even if this card gets limited, you definitely want to be playing the 1 copy because it really gets your entire engine kick-started. From there, one major card that you want to play is the currently limited copy of Hornet Drones. This card is a quick play spell. Its unlock effect isn't that impressive, but it basically says if you control no monsters, you can activate this to special summon a Sky Striker Ace token that basically is 0 attack and defense, unless it happens to be boosted by you having 3 spells. Again, that isn't a hugely relevant effect unless you happen to be like poking for a game with it. The whole point of this is it is a Sky Striker Ace monster that is not one of the kind of 4 elemental attributes of water, fire, earth, or wind, and so you can use this in order to make your summons. But for right now, just realize that this card is the key to a lot of your Link summon plays, and it's easily accessible thanks to your 3 copies of Engage. From there, we have a lot of cards in the toolbox that the Sky Striker theme offers, starting off with Afterburners and Jamming Waves, the 2 Sky Striker maneuver spells. These cards are very powerful, and if you imagine in some other decks back in the day, this would be basically the package you need to take care of everything. They mirror each other in that the primary effects of Afterburners and Jamming Waves are able to kill a face-up monster or a set trap or spell, respectively. So Afterburners can pop that annoying Link monster that has some control effect, or you could go ahead and Jamming Waves your opponent's face-down card. Then, if you happen to have 3 or more, the unlock condition is to kill the opposite type of card regardless of position. So Afterburner snipes a face-up monster, then kills any spell or trap. And Jamming Waves kills any set card, and then can snipe any monster. These cards are very powerful one-ofs to add to your deck because you could search them and recover them at will, and it basically gives you a lot of flexibility no matter what type of deck you're playing against, because it basically covers every bit of ground you could, except for cards that are directly immune to targeting or destruction by these cards. So very powerful options, of course. Then we have a lot of interactive cards. I already talked about the quick play spell Hornet Drones, but that doesn't have to be a quick play spell for its full function. A lot of the following cards do benefit from their quick play status in allowing you to interact with your opponent as the control deck that this is known for. We're playing the maximum number of Sky Striker Mecha Widow Anchor, a quick play spell that says You can target one of your opponent's effect monsters in order to negate that monster's effects until the end of the turn. Then, if it's an unlock, you get to steal it. But wait, savvy readers and players of this theme may recognize that this card doesn't necessarily have to negate one of your opponent's monsters. It can negate your own monsters. Why would that be relevant, though? Wouldn't you only ever really want to just take one of your opponent's cards? Well, that's where knowledge of this game and the cards really rewards you in this game and in this deck specifically. If your opponent tries to Widow Anchor your own monster during a mirror match scenario where they would steal your monster and now you have nothing that you can fight back with or defend yourself with, you can use your own Widow Anchor to negate your own monster. Because of the way chains work, your chain link 2 you responded with will fully resolve first, blanking your monster, and then when you get to chain link 1, your opponent's copy of Widow Anchor, they are now no longer able to negate your monster because you already negated it, which means they don't get to follow to the then secondary effect where they steal your monster, effectively meaning they cannot steal your monster and link it off into one of their own. And that becomes a key defensive maneuver, a defensive Sky Striker maneuver, if you will, against the mirror match. So just one big example of something where it's honestly very nuanced, but if you know this, you'll do a lot better than a lot of the other Sky Striker players who are not familiar with the proper text wording of these cards. So that's one of the reasons, again, I really love this archetype. You just realize all these little things and they can pay off. They can pay huge dividends. Next card we're playing is a copy of Sky Striker Mecha Eagle Booster. This card fluctuates in quantity 1 to 2 depending on the format, and in a lot of situations where you're playing against your opponent's, Sky Striker matches, you may end up playing a second copy of this just because it gives you immunity on your monsters. Its primary ability is to make it so that one of your face-up monsters on the field is unaffected by card effects this entire turn except its own. Good for protecting your 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲 from Widow Anchor or something of the sort. But you can also, if you have the unlock effect of 3 or more spells in your grave, make it so it can't be killed by battle this turn, meaning you have a juggernaut in the defensive, preventing yourself from being destroyed by your opponent and their onslaught. So this card is really powerful for that, and again, just playing the single copy allows you to go and at least protect yourself from your opponent. Right now, I am playing a pair of Sky Striker Mecha Shark Cannon, as this is basically 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲, as its primary effect lets you target a monster in your opponent's graveyard and banish it as a quick play spell, so it breaks apart your opponent's combos. Or the unlock effect lets you special summon that monster to your field instead, but it can't attack. You gotta remember that because of the activation conditions of Shark Cannon and Widow Anchor, of you not having any monsters in your main monster zones, if you use their secondary abilities to place your opponent's monster into your zones, it would shut you off from resolving any further ones, or activating them actually. Because the tricky thing with these is that they're quick play spells, and none of them are hard once per turns. So whether it's a Shark Cannon, Widow Anchor, pairs of each, combination of each, if you have multiples between these, you can chain them all together, meeting the activation timing of you control no monsters. Then you can special summon and steal all your opponent's resources, and then just turn them all into one big link summoning chain on your field during your own turn. So very flexible. Do keep that in mind. That's another big thing that you can get out of Sky Strikers if you recognize how your cards work. But Shark Cannon effectively becomes extra copies of 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲 in the mirror match, and while the deck is still one of the top contenders and very popular, stealing your opponent's copy of the one of 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲 is very beneficial to you because that effect triggers upon any kind of summon, and Shark Cannon basically will then become extra copies of 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲 in addition to your own. So imagine playing now 3 copies of 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲 between your own, this one, and this one here. It becomes a lot better thing to do. Plus, with all the Orchest and other graveyard-oriented strategies that you typically see from this point on in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shark Cannon is a must-run, at least at the 1 copy. From there, we're going a little bit differently. We're going to be playing 2 to 3 copies. A lot of people tend to kind of coalesce on 2, but some people do play 3, of Sky Striker Airspace Area 0. This is a field spell that says you could target one other card you control and excavate the top 3 cards of your deck. If you do, you can add one of the excavated Sky Striker cards to your hand and then shuffle the rest back into your deck. Then, if you revealed a Sky Striker card at all, whether or not you added a card from your deck to your hand, you have to send your targeted card to the graveyard. That may seem like a problem, but that's actually a very good thing because you can go ahead and intentionally target your quick play spells. You could target your main monster Ray, as we'll talk about in just a moment here, or you could target one of your main monster zones that just you can't get rid of. You need to get rid of something. This will let you do so while digging for more resources. Then, if Area 0 happens to leave your field by a card effect, you could special summon a copy of Sky Striker Ace Ray from your deck to your field. In the future, should we gain any other Sky Striker Ace monster, that would also be an eligible target, but for right now, it's going to be Ray, and just having additional copies of your main starter monster that lets you access your Link monsters becomes a good thing for consistency. So that's why people like playing 2 to 3 of this. Some people do like the 3 for maximum consistency, but sometimes it becomes more counterintuitive and counterproductive because it can clog if you play too many of them. So you'll have to pick your poison with these. Depending on how many terraformings you have and such, you may kind of play around with the numbers, but typically 2 to 3 airspace 0. Then we have to think about recovery, and that's where these two cards come into play. On the left is the equip spell Sky Striker Base Mech Armory, and this card is very interesting. It needs to be activated while you control no monsters in the main monster zones, so you can activate it to equip onto your Link monster or even to your opponent's monster if you really wanted to. Anytime that monster kills a monster in battle, you get to draw 1 card immediately, and it gains an additional attack on monsters in each battle phase. It's no longer able to attack directly, so you could, in theory, protect yourself from your opponent's onslaught by equipping something to your opponent's monster. And then, if this card is sent to the graveyard because of a card effect from the field, you could go ahead and recycle 3 of your different Sky Striker monsters, like different as in not the base, not the Hercules base here, and just recycle them back into your deck or extra deck if they're Link monsters, and that effectively gives you more copies of some of the limited cards that you have in the archetype. And that's why I honestly feel there's a good chance that this deck will be around in some capacity, even if it's entirely rogue, even after a huge hit on the ban list. Unless you outright ban a lot of these cards, they have some longevity, and you simply have to splash in some other defensive cards in order to make this theme thrive in the way that it can. On the right now, we have the very famous Sky Striker Mecha Modules Multi-Roll, a card that's already limited to 1, and the reason is because it is like Spellbook of Judgment. Once per turn, you could target 1 other card you control and send it to the graveyard. Also, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to your spell activations for the rest of this turn, even if this card leaves the field, and even if you failed to send a card to the graveyard, because it's an also kind of additional ability. That first effect, again, is not a bad thing. It helps you clear your main monster zones, and as you're starting to see with things like Hercules Base and the Airspace Area 0, you're able to trigger the secondary effects of those cards by sending them to the graveyard. So very powerful sense of synergy there. In addition, you can only gain this effect once per turn, you know, blah, 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 skip through all that text, but during the end phase, you count up all the Sky Striker spells with different names in your graveyard up to the number of spells that you resolved that have Sky Striker in their name while this card is on the field, and you're able to go ahead and just set them all back to your field, but banish them when they leave the field. So gives you a little bit of a second chance with some of your cards, and you can do some very clever tricks with this because this card is in the end phase along with some of the other cards that we'll talk about later too. So do keep that point in mind here. Some of you experienced people are going to recognize what I'm talking about, but there is an interaction with Shizuku that you're able to go ahead and basically stack the deck in your favor with these cards. So very powerful cards here, but that's it for the toolbox. Now it's time to jump to the monsters. So now we finally get to our primary pilot, our Sky Striker Ace Ray, which is going to be usually a 3 of in this deck to maximize our consistency. She's a level 4 Dark Warrior monster with 1500 attack and defense points, and she has a very powerful quick effect. You could tribute her during either turn to special summon a Sky Striker Ace monster from your extra deck to the extra monster zone. And because a lot of these effects trigger when they're special summoned through any means, that means you're basically link summoning them during your opponent's turn. Then, if this happens to be in your graveyard and one of your Sky Striker Ace Link monsters you control dies by battle or leaves because of an opponent's card effect, you could special summon this card back, and although you can only use each effect of Ray once per turn, that means, let's say you normal summon Ray, you go ahead and activate your multi-roll or your Airspace Area 0, and you go and choose Ray as your target. Ray can then just tribute herself off. You get a free link monster, lose nothing to resolve the effects of your cards, and then you basically get to keep going with your turn. You lost nothing. Ray interacts perfectly with these cards that get them, get cards off of your main monster zones. In addition, Ray is able to then set herself in the graveyard so that next turn, if your opponent deals with your link monster, you just bring back Ray, and then you can immediately respond using Ray to go into a different link monster. And because we have some offensive and defensive options in our extra deck, Ray ends up becoming very powerful for that reason. So very, very good boss monster for this theme. You think it's pretty ridiculous that a boss monster has 1500 attack and defense, but realistically, this card's so flexible, and it really leads into all of your plays. And it's kind of a nice little bonus that she's a warrior, because we're able to go ahead and play the one copy of Rhoda as well. She's not a machine or anything. She is indeed a warrior. Now we're going to go through and talk about the link monsters, starting off with the primary one, the one of 𝗣𝗍ici𝗳𝗶𝗹𝗲. If this card ever becomes semi-limited again or unlimited, obviously you play the maximum number, because this thing follows a pattern of it is a fire monster, so in order to summon it, you need a 𝗣𝗍ici𝗳𝗶𝗹𝗲 monster that is not fire, so any other card that's not 𝗣𝗍ici𝗳𝗶𝗹𝗲. She has the same 1500 attack, no defense obviously, but she's a link one, and she says if she's special summoned through any means, shark canning your opponent's copy, bringing this thing back from your own graveyard with something like Monster Reborn, or triggering it off of something like a Wraith, you can use her ability to target one 𝗣𝗍striker spell in your graveyard, add it back to your hand. And that's where things get nutty, because not only can you toolbox your entire graveyard, you can just get engaged. So engaged basically is Pot of Greed. Now you recover engage and play it again, because no once per turn clause on anything, and then you get to go for that. You can only special summon 𝗣𝗍𝗄 once per turn. That's kind of the restriction they put on this card, but it was still so good that it ended up being limited regardless. And then she does have a continuous ability that gives her 100 attack for every spell in your graveyard. Doesn't even have to be 𝗣𝗍striker spells, just every spell card in your graveyard, which means she can get pretty large pretty quickly. And it's unfortunate that we don't have the extra power of multiples of this card, because the additional attack power would have been very appreciated in a deck like this that's more control based and doesn't always have the easiest time attacking, barring a certain 𝗼𝗿𝗲 monster. Next up, we're playing the maximum number of copies of 𝗣𝗍striker_Ace Shizuku. This is the water card, and so you need a non-water link monster to go. Basically, rotate between them, if you will. Ray is dark, so you can summon any of them off of her. And this card kind of parallels 𝗣𝗍𝗄, whereas 𝗣𝗍𝗄 is able to recur cards from your graveyard and buff herself. Shizuku says you can go ahead and debuff all your opponent's attack and defense by 100 for every spell in your graveyard, and during the end phase, if this card was special summoned this turn, you can take a 𝗣𝗍striker spell from your deck to your hand as long as it has a different name from all the cards in your graveyard. What that means is if you have multi-roll on your field and you're trying to recur all your spells, but you summon Shizuku that turn, and so end phase, which do you resolve first? You want to resolve the multi-roll first. So make Shizuku your chain link 1, multi-roll your chain link 2. Multi-roll will pluck all the cards out of your graveyard that you want back on your field for the reuse, and now that there are no copies of them potentially in your graveyard, Shizuku can add another copy of that card to your hand. So if you grab your only engage, you now get to pluck another engage from your deck to your hand. So another interaction between the cards that gets you a lot more advantage than if you just play these cards at face value. And again, the reason I'm saying this so much is you'll probably find as you play this deck yourself, there are a lot of cool things you can do with the strategy if you just keep an open mind, keep your eyes open, and look at the cool things you can do with your cards. And this is why I love this theme just so much. So that's why we play the Shizuku at the maximum number of copies. Not only do we just need 𝗣𝗍striker bodies sometimes, but Shizuku is one of the best ones. 𝗣𝗍𝗄 is our wind monster, follows the same kind of pattern for stats and everything, but she has an arrow pointing downward. So whereas you may want to summon Shizuku kind of in the upper extra monster zone to put your opponent in that corner on your right, and 𝗣𝗍𝗄 on the left corner to kind of shove them into that opposite corner, depending on meta, of course. 𝗣𝗍𝗄 actually gives you a marker, which is a nice change, allowing you to summon more things. Whether or not you would want to kind of becomes, dependent on the situation, because you don't want to shut off all your spells unnecessarily, but it does give you some more room to use something like, I don't know, Nightmare Phoenix, or, something with a sideways arrow. 𝗣𝗄𝗄 Hayate is mainly in here for two reasons, actually both of her abilities. The first is in a situation where you don't already have something like Ray in the graveyard, you're able to use her to yard any Sky Striker card from your deck to the graveyard when you deal battle damage to your opponent. But JD, this is 1500 attack, so how are you going to do the damage? Well, this card can attack your opponent directly for the 1500 or however much you may have buffed it up to with some other card, and that's extremely relevant because poking for 1500 every turn is actually how you win a lot of your games, or at least get very close to winning your games, bringing them down from the monstrous 8,000 to a much more manageable 5,000, let's say, where now you can sweep with one of your link monsters. And the fact that you're able to set up your graveyard for further plays with your modules, your multi-roll, or, you know, reviving things with your 𝗣𝗍𝗲𝗍. This card ends up becoming pretty good, and if nothing else, again, just dump your Ray, make sure you have her in the graveyard, and when Hayate falls in battle, you could special Ray and then get your defensive wall of link monsters started. So Hayate, you want to play 3 copies of, because you'll find that over time, if you just play Sky Strikers, if you cut Hayate, you're going to run out of resources. You need to use non-Hayate to summon your other cards. So you basically, to gain resources, will go into your 𝗣𝗍𝗲𝗍, maybe into your Shizuku as well at the end phase, and you're attacking with your Hayate. You're going through as many copies of these each turn as you kind of need in order to get your game state rolling, which ultimately means in order to do it turn after turn, you're going to need the maximum number of copies. That said, we're only playing 1 to 2 copies of Sky Striker 𝗍𝗍𝗲𝗍 because this card is not the greatest. The only reason you'd consider playing 3 is if you really wanted to give up the 1 extra deck spot just to have another Sky Striker monster. But realistically, unless you can get either a 5th Sky Striker link monster variety, or yeah, you know, I guess for some reason Hayate or Shizuku end up getting hit, so you can't have 3 of those, you're not really going to want to play more than 1 or 2 𝗣𝗍𝗲. She has a downward arrow as well, and a defensive ability that says when she's special summoned, you could target one of your opponent's monsters. It can't attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. And that's really important because what basically that means is you could special summon this when your opponent summons 𝗼𝗿𝗲 Sword Dragon, and you won't die that turn, hopefully. That's the big purpose with this, stop your opponent from OTKing you. And then she does have an interesting ability in time as well, because every time you activate a Sky Striker spell card or its effect while this card's on the field, you just immediately gain 100 life, and with the rules the way they are these days, gaining even that little smidge can put you over the edge and just win you the game outright if the game is ended in time at that point. So 𝗣𝗍𝗲𝗍's in here. Definitely the 1 copy, at least. I like 2 because I still like having the extra body to rotate through, just to not run out of resources. But again, that's basically pretty standard, as they say, but that's why this is the standard for this theme. Now that we've talked about the main core for Sky Strikers, it's time to go back and look at the rest of the deck in order to look at tech to flesh out the main, and then to go to the extra deck and finish that up as well. Starting off, we're going to run 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods, which is basically the spell or trap equivalent of Foolish Burial with a hard once per turn, and a single copy of Metal Foes Fusion. The reason for this is when you activate Foolish Burial Goods and send Metal Foes Fusion, you've already put 2 spells in your graveyard towards your 3, and since you care about the spell count, this is a starter play that will get you towards that sweet, sweet +1 engage play that can be repeated again and again. So that's why you do this. Metal Foes Fusion, also, if you've seen my Metal Foes deck, you'll recognize has the ability to recycle itself into the deck to draw you a card. So effectively, if nothing else, this becomes a copy of Upstart Goblin. Just, you know, give your opponent 1,000 life to draw a card. This is still a good card. You're playing the maximum number of this if you're in the TCG, probably. Japan apparently doesn't believe in this. I don't know about Korea. But you basically want to play this card because it gets you a free spell in your graveyard and makes your deck more consistent. This is basically an engine that does the same kind of thing, except it has the luxury of granting you 2 spells in the graveyard, and that actually comes up a lot, where that becomes the reason you start snowballing that advantage, because it unlocks your cards very quickly. And then the fact that at any other point you just draw into another free card means Metal Foes Fusion basically rounds out the engine and makes it not a minus. Foolish Burial Goods does, of course, function as Foolish Burial Goods though, so don't be afraid to experiment in the situation. If you need to send an engage to the graveyard just to fetch it off 𝗣𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗍, or you need something else yarded, you know, you can always go ahead and do that as well. We are then going to play the 1 copy of Terraforming, because this lets us grab our airspace 0, but on top of that, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon. You could play Twin Twisters. Some people like playing Cosmic Cyclone. I personally like the classic MST in this deck, mainly because its ability to destroy a spell or trap on the field is very, very flexible, not only for stopping your opponent's pendulum and trap plays, but primarily for interacting with our own cards here. Remember, if you're able to send airspace to the graveyard, you special summon Ray. So having this card along with access to 0 means you suddenly have a Sky Striker monster and your hand is not totally dead. It also lets you go and take this card along with any other spell in your hand. Yes, you have to set that card and then pop it with this, which could be a minus if it is not something like the base, but at the very least, you're yarding 2 of your spells in your graveyard, so hopefully Engage can be closer to live, and then once you hit 3 spells, you start plussing back all the resources. So temporary minus in order to get yourself set up, where then you now have all of the benefits of playing Sky Striker. So that's the main reason I like this over Cosmic Cyclone. Cosmic Cyclone's not going to do you any good because it just banishes the card, which, you know, again, could be very relevant depending on what you're playing, but in a vacuum especially, you want to be looking at something like this that interacts with your own plays. Twin Twisters is a higher impact card that could be worth it depending on the cards you play in a format, if you're playing against a lot of pendulums or trap heavy strategies. But if you just want to use it on one of your own cards, it does also cost the card, and although it's not technically a minus unless you're blowing up your own cards, it's still something you want to keep in mind. Do you really want to invest that many cards? Though again, Twin Twisters could single-handedly yard 3 cards by getting rid of itself, discarding a spell, and killing one of your own spells, all while killing one of your opponent's spells or traps to boot. So could be a possible option as well. It's just MST is a nice 1-for-1 exchange card that also has the ability to temporary minus you into your sweet spot play. From there, I want to talk about kind of the defensive nature of hand traps and Sky Strikers, right? We're going to be adding, as I just accidentally said, hand traps because that fits right into the control theme. And we're starting off, of course, in that regard with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Nothing really special to say about this card in this particular strategy. It's just an all-around great controlling card. You don't need to synchro or link with this card or anything in this particular strategy, so it is what it is, but Ash Blossom is definitely an all-star card in general, and it fits perfectly into this type of a control-based theme. I also like playing 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Not only is it good at sniping key cards that you may find annoying, but you basically get an extra type of removal that you don't really have in the main Sky Striker arsenal. Widow Anchor can certainly steal your opponent's cards, but sometimes you'd rather just get it off of the board, and Ghost Ogre does that. It also works very nicely in the mirror match and other situations where your opponent has a continuous or field spell that they'd like to keep in play. Ghost Ogre will snipe cards like multi-roll and just prevent your opponent from, you know, gaining free resources. So very powerful card. I like it because of the different type of ability it adds to the deck. And then you could play your choice in Effect Failure or Impermanence, but I personally have a sweet spot for Impermanence because I like the fact that it not only serves as a Called by the Grave Impervious trap card here, but you also can set it and then blank your opponent's cards, which could be very relevant in certain matchups. If your opponent's got a multi-roll on the field, you could set this in that zone, blank their monster, and stop the multi-roll. You could go ahead and negate one of your opponent's cards and, you know, shut down a trap that's face down. Lots of utility with this, so I kind of like the extra utility, but of course it is more of an expensive card. But so, you know, if you want to play Veiler, definitely consider something for effect negation. I just prefer the Impermanence personally. And then finally for the main, this is something that some people like playing. I honestly was not a huge fan of this initially when I drew it because I found, oh, when I drew this, it kind of wasn't necessary. But the whole point of playing evenly matched is that it's able to go and just wipe your opponent's heavily invested board clean, which suddenly means if you're playing 1-for-1 or better exchanges with your Sky Striker themed cards, your opponent's not ever going to recover. And that's why this card's in here. It's just such a powerful blowout auto win using a deck that's as controlling as this. Feel free, you definitely could cut out these three in order to play either alternative defensive cards, or heck, you could even play wild tech like 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍𝗲 because, you know, that card will special summon itself from hand or grave if Ray tributes herself. But, you know, it's worth playing something. Very high impact, I feel. And this is one of the few decks like Cyber Dragons, like Mech Knights, where you can honestly afford to play this in the main and it fits right at home, just because of how powerful it is and then how well you can follow up with your 1-for-1 exchange plays. So that's why I'm playing this for right now. Honestly, I kind of love it, I kind of hate it. It depends on the format, and it would honestly change over time as well, potentially, but for right now, I'm liking it more than I don't. And then now we'll talk about the extra deck here. So we're playing for Link 2's 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗲𝗄 and Nightmare Phoenix. This card is obviously a staple in extra decks. When you have your Kaina or your Hayate pointing downward, this thing opens up another zone if you really need to link climb. But another cool thing is it's a fire monster that everyone plays, just like Ash Blossom, and Salamandrates are still around too. So 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗲𝗄 basically says you need 2 monsters including a fire, so could be Ash Blossom, could be Phoenix, could be 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗍, could be your opponent's resources as well. But you're basically able to summon this thing in order to then immediately special summon one of your opponent's fire monsters from their graveyard to your field, and that's dumb because now you can link climb off of your opponent's cards, and if you took a Nightmare Phoenix, for example, you can climb up into a 4 very easily. So that's why these cards are in here. General utility, and then just people happen to be playing a lot of fire cards, so this card's really good for that. Plus, again, steal your opponent's 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍, use its ability, make your opponent cry in the mirror match because you have access to more copies of a limited card than they do. Then, for Link 3s, I play 1 copy of Ningirsu and 1 copy of Triple Burst Dragon. Ningirsu's in here because you're playing Link 1s anyway, so if you make any Link 2 on top of that, you're able to climb into this guy very effectively, and he lets you go and take cards on each side of the field and just send them to the graveyard, just push them somewhere else, you know, and that's very powerful because without targeting, without destroying, you're just getting rid of your opponent's resources in exchange for, honestly, maybe a monster in your main monster zone that you didn't want anymore. So very flexible card, very powerful. This card is actually a Link 3 that will gain you significant advantage and positioning in the game versus a lot of the other Link 3s. Like Nightmare Unicorn isn't the best in this strategy. You already have the ways, you know, in your deck to get rid of just 1 card at a time. This card is kind of nice because it's a combo enabler as well, in that it can send your, you know, area 0 to the graveyard. It can clear out your main monster zone in addition to doing all these other things. So very flexible and powerful for that. And then the Triple Burst Dragon has 3 abilities. It does piercing damage. It makes your opponent unable to respond with battle tricks. So basically your opponent's Rays and their Link monsters won't be able to respond to stuff, which is pretty sweet. And then it has an additional ability in this deck, is very accessible thanks to Eagle Booster, protecting this card from card effects and battle. But essentially, any other turn besides the turn it was Link summoned, you could tribute Triple Burst Dragon in order to revive a Link 2 or lower monster, and if you special summon 𝗣𝗍𝗶𝗍 or any other card, you get that effect at the appropriate timing. So this card's very flexible and very much a utility card for this deck, so I just love it. It's just so good at so many things that it comes up a lot more than you would expect in a lot of other strategies. And then the last 2 cards I want to play are the Boral Sword Dragon, because let's be honest, this card lets decks like Frog win when they probably don't have any other monster that they could realistically attack with. So this thing is just so powerful. There's no reason not to play it, especially in a deck that, again, kind of suffers when you only have Hayate poking every turn and you're only doing 1500 damage every turn. This thing just lets you swing for 6000 or more all at once to end the game, which is very relevant. And then Topologic Bomber Dragon does have a Flame Wingman style blast your opponent for 3000 effect if it kills a monster, but another cool application is you get to go and wipe your opponent's and your own main monster zones anytime a card is summoned to a Link point. That's very relevant because it makes all your Sky Striker spells live at all times, and it's just the easiest type of card to access as link 4 if you steal something with Shark Cannon or Widow Anchor. This card just needs any 2 effect monsters versus 𝗼𝗿𝗲 Sword unfortunately needs 3 or more effect monsters, and so a lot of times you'll summon the Topologic Bomber Dragon just because it's the easiest thing that you could summon, but it's fortunate that it synergizes enough with the theme that it's worth playing in. Because this card's getting a reprint in Dual Devastator as well, I think a lot of you guys who are picking up Sky Strikers only recently because of the decreased cost and accessibility increase to the cards will find this a welcome addition as well. If you watched this long-winded video about Sky Strikers in its entirety, thanks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of at least what I think is how we got to the modern era Sky Striker list as much as I did putting it together for you guys. We'll start off with the main deck here. We have triple Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, triple Ghost Stoker and Snow Rabbit, triple Sky Striker Ace Ray. Then for spells, we have double Foolish Burial Goods and Metal Foes Fusion, triple Mystical Space Typhoon, 1 Reinforcement of the Army. Then for the Sky Striker spells, we have double Airspace Area 0, 1 each of Maneuver Afterburners and Jamming Waves. Then for the Mecha, we have 1 Eagle Booster, 1 Hornet Drones, double Shark Cannon, triple Widow Anchor. For Mecha Modules, we just have the 1 multi-roll, unfortunately. And then for Mech Armory, we have the Hercules base. Then we have, of course, our 3 copies of Mobilize Engage, 1 Terraforming, and 1 Upstart Goblin. Finally, we have for traps 3 copies each of the Evenly Matched Trap card and Infinite Impermanence. So 40 cards in the main once again. And then for our extra deck, we have the 1 copy of Sky Striker Ace Kagari. We have triple Shizuku, we have triple Hayate, and double Kaina to round out the Sky Striker accounts. And then we have for Link 2's Nightmare Phoenix and Hira, the Fire Charmer Ablaze. For Link 3's, we have Ningirsu World Chalice Warrior and Triple Burst Dragon. Then for Link 4's, we have 𝗼𝗿𝗲 Sword Dragon and Topologic Bomber Dragon. And of course, we can't forget the nice Sky Striker Ace token for our Hornet Drones. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.